Chapter 12, Part 3 of Lincoln. Lincoln now began to believe he might just squeak through the election contest after all. When the votes were counted on November 8th, he received almost 56% of the total, a near landslide. In the all-important Electoral College, Lincoln won overwhelmingly with 212 votes to McClellan's 21. It turned out to be one of the most lopsided triumphs in American history. Perhaps most gratifying of all to the president, the soldiers' votes, counted separately in the days before absentee ballots, favored Lincoln most heavily of all. Even though McClellan had once been a popular commander among his men, the president overwhelmingly defeated him among the troops, 80 to 20%. Mary Lincoln was especially relieved by the news. She had run up many unpaid bills in her growing mania to buy clothing for herself and decorations like velvet curtains and fancy dishes for the White House. She had come to live in fear that if her husband lost the election, he would find out about the debts and, worse, be required to pay them. Victory or not, Mary remained worried, this time about the president's declining vitality. That means his, energy level. For the first time in their 23 years as husband and wife, Mary thought Lincoln had begun to look older than his years. As she admitted in fear to her confidant Lizzie Keckley, "Poor Mr. Lincoln is looking so broken-hearted, so completely worn out. I fear he will not get through the next 4 years." But an overjoyed Lincoln felt re-energized by his victory. He regarded his re-election as proof the Union was willing after all to fight for freedom. To a crowd that gathered on election night outside the White House, Lincoln declared that his re-election provided strong evidence of the people's resolution to stand by free government and the rights of humanity. With the people so strongly behind him, Lincoln quickly turned to making the promise of the Union Party platform a reality, the great work of passing a constitutional amendment banning slavery. The country Lincoln had once called a house divided, was perhaps close at last to reuniting under the banner of liberty. For a time, however, Lincoln worried that his own house remained divided too. For months, his son Richard had tried to convince his father that he should be allowed to enlist in the army. So many young men his age had served and died in military service, and several of Robert's Harvard classmates had gone to war. The president's son had a point. Other families were suffering far more hardships in defense of the Union, and to many it seemed unfair that Lincoln's own adult child had not joined the ranks. Some of Lincoln's political enemies whispered that the president received special preference for his own child, a charge that only made Robert more eager to sign up. Lincoln held his approval for one reason only. He believed that if Robert died in battle, his fragile wife Mary would fall over an emotional cliff and lose her reason entirely. She had already seen 2 of her sons die and now lived in perpetual fear that something terrible would happen to Robert or Tad. Lincoln felt he had had enough on his hands without worrying about further risking his wife's health, and he begged Robert to understand. Meanwhile, he gently prepared Mary for the fact that, like other sons, Robert would eventually have to serve too. "I know that Robert's plea to go into the army is manly and noble," Mary moaned to her husband at one point, "and I want him to go, but oh, I am so frightened that he may never come back to me." After Robert graduated from Harvard College in 1864 and entered Harvard Law School, the boy increased the pressure on his father to give him permission to enlist, permission that, as an adult, he technically no longer needed. "Many a poor mother, Mary, has had to make this sacrifice and has given up every son she had and lost them all," Lincoln reminded his wife. Finally, the president hit upon a plan. 2 months before his scheduled inauguration, he wrote a private letter to General Grant proposing that he take Robert onto his personal staff, asking that Grant decide the question "as though I was not president, but only a friend." Lincoln explained, "My son, now in his 22nd year, having graduated Harvard, wishes to see something of the war before it ends. I do not wish to put him in the ranks, nor yet to give him a commission to which those who have already long served are better entitled and better qualified to hold. Could he, without embarrassment to you or detriment to the service, go into your military family with some nominal rank, I, and not the public, furnishing his necessary means?" A few days later, Grant graciously replied that he would be most happy to add the young man to his official staff. General Grant awarded him the rank of captain, and Robert T. Lincoln, as he preferred to be called, headed off at last to fight for his country, his father, and freedom. Yeah, let's go ahead and end there today. That is the end of chapter 12. I'll start with chapter 13, beginning next.